I was only 25 years old, but my ambitions were far greater than most of my peers. While others my age were chasing stable jobs, casual relationships, or wasting time on things I considered distractions, I was consumed by one singular thought: building something of my own. My company was small, barely surviving, but it carried my name and my sweat. Every dollar invested was mine, every risk was mine, and every sleepless night was mine too. The truth was, I wasn't from wealth. My family didn't come from money, and every step of this journey had been uphill. My father wanted me to stick to a steady path: law school, finance, something safe. My mother worried endlessly about how young I was to be carrying so much responsibility. Friends doubted me, whispering that I'd crash before I ever took flight. But inside me burned a stubborn fire. I refused to be ordinary, and I refused to fail. Oil was my chance. It was the bloodline of economies, the root of power, and if I could secure a supply deal, my company would transform overnight. I had spent months negotiating smaller contracts, building connections, but now the real opportunity lay ahead of me, in the heart of Arabia. The desert kingdom was not only rich in resources, but also rich in culture, tradition, and complexities I barely understood. Still, I booked my flight, packed my suit, and told myself that this trip would define everything. When the plane landed, the heat was the first thing that struck me. It wasn't just warm, it wrapped around me like a heavy cloak. The air was thick with sun, sand, and something ancient, as though the desert itself whispered stories old in the city that now rose above it. Towers of glass shimmered under the golden sky, standing beside mosques with minarets that pierced the heavens. Rolls Royces slid past camels on the road, and I couldn't help but feel that this was a land where contradictions lived comfortably side by side. The Sheikh's palace was unlike anything I had ever seen. From the outside, its gates stretched high with intricate golden patterns, guarded by men in crisp uniforms who carried themselves like shadows, quiet but aware of everything. The drive inside was lined with date palms, and fountains leapt into the air as though competing with the sun. Inside, the halls were a study in elegance. Marble floors so polished they reflected the chandeliers above, walls carved with verses and designs that seemed to dance when I looked too long. Servants moved with silent grace, and I felt both out of place and strangely honored. I told myself to focus. This wasn't a sightseeing tour, it was business. Every detail mattered. The numbers, the conditions, the timelines. Yet as I adjusted my tie and was led into the main hall, my nerves betrayed me. My palms were slick, my heart beat louder than it should have been. Then he entered. The Sheikh wasn't what I had expected. In my mind, I had painted the image of an older man, gray-bearded, distant, the kind of ruler who commanded attention through silence. But he was younger than that. Perhaps in his early 40s, tall, dressed in traditional robes that seemed to flow with his every step. His face was striking, strong lines softened by the calm intensity of his dark eyes. He carried power the way some men carried weapons, naturally, without effort. When his gaze met mine, I felt something strange. It wasn't just the scrutiny of a businessman sizing up a deal. It lingered. It searched. For a moment, I felt stripped of all the shields I had built around myself. I forced a smile, introduced myself, and launched into the speech I had prepared, filled with numbers, logistics, and promises. But instead of the tough negotiation I had braced for, I was met with surprising ease. He listened intently, nodding at all the right places, his eyes never leaving mine. When I mentioned prices, he agreed. When I laid out delivery terms, he agreed. Even when I pushed a little harder, testing the waters with requests I thought he might reject, he agreed. It was too easy. Deals of the scale weren't supposed to be handed out without a fight, without hours of back and forth. Inside, relief battled with suspicion. On one hand, this was everything I wanted. My company's future was practically being handed to me on a golden platter. On the other, it didn't make sense. Why would a man of his stature, with endless options, agree so quickly to a young stranger like me? The meeting ended with polite words, a firm handshake, and his invitation to stay for dinner. His grip lingered just a little longer than expected, his smile carrying something unspoken. I nodded, thanked him, and tried to keep my thoughts in check. As I walked out of the hall, past the marble floors and golden arches. I told myself I should be celebrating. I had won. The deal was mine. Yet my chest was heavy, not with triumph, but with questions I didn't yet know how to answer. The following day's negotiation should have been routine: papers, contracts, more talk of numbers and logistics. But they weren't. The Sheikh listened, yes, but his focus wasn't entirely on the details. His gaze wandered, not to the documents in front of us, but to me. It wasn't obvious at first. It was subtle, almost careful. But after an hour talking, I couldn't ignore it anymore. Every time I made a point, his lips curved into a small smile, as though he was less impressed by my words and more intrigued by the way I spoke them. When I adjusted my tie, his eyes lingered. When I leaned forward to emphasize something, I felt his attention sharpen, not on the figures I was pointing to, but on me. It unnerved me, and yet, strangely, I didn't feel threatened, only watched. He began complimenting me in ways that didn't fit the rhythm of our business talk. "You are very young," he said once, his tone not dismissive but admiring. "To come here from across the world, to take risks most men twice your age would never dare, it is rare." I laughed it off, saying ambition was all I had, but he only smiled, his eyes soft. "Ambition suits you," he said simply. I told myself it was nothing. Cultural differences, I reasoned. Hospitality. Perhaps, here, respect might take different forms than I was used to in America. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more in his words. Dinner that evening erased any doubt. I expected a formal setting. Perhaps a grand table with advisors, servants moving about, the air thick with formality. Instead, it was just the two of us. A private room, golden lanterns glowing against white stone walls, a table laid with dishes I couldn't even name, platters of lamb, rice studded with saffron, bowls of fruit glistening under the warm light. He didn't sit at the head of the table, as a ruler might. He sat across from me, close enough that I felt the weight of his presence in every movement. He served me himself, lifting food onto my plate with his own hands, urging me to try this, taste that. "You are my guest," he said when I protested, "not just a partner in business. And in my home, a guest is treated with honor." But it didn't feel like honor. It felt like something softer, something personal. He listened when I spoke, not just with interest, but with intensity, as though every detail about my life fascinated him. When I mentioned my struggles to build my company, he leaned forward, his brows drawn, as if my battles mattered deeply to him. When I laughed at my own mistakes, his eyes lit up, warmed by something that wasn't mere amusement. At one point, he said quietly, "You remind me of the sea." I looked at him, confused. The sea? Yes. Restless, ambitious, never still, but also endless, full of depth that others cannot see. I forced a smile, unsure how to respond, telling myself again that maybe this was simply his way. Poetic, expressive. Different culture, different words. Yet in my chest, unease and curiosity knotted together. When the night ended, he walked me back to the guest quarters himself, ignoring the servants who tried to follow. At my door, he gave me a parting smile that lingered long after I closed it behind me. I exhaled, shoulders dropping with relief. It had been a long day, and I told myself I was imagining things. I showered, changed, and began to prepare for bed. That was when I noticed it. A folded piece of paper slipped under my door. I picked it up, my hands tightening before I even opened it. Inside was handwriting, neat, elegant, written in English but with curves that gave away his native tongue. The first line made my breath stop. "I love you." The words glared at me from the page, sharp, undeniable. I read further, my eyes racing across the lines. He wrote that from the moment I walked into his palace, something inside him shifted, that my presence had moved him in ways he couldn't explain, that he had agreed to the deal not just because of business, but because he wanted me close, wanted to see me, to know me. And then came the request, "Stay, a few days more. It will make me happy." I sat on the edge of the bed, the letter trembling in my hand. My pulse hammered in my ears. This wasn't business anymore. It wasn't cultural generosity or poetic words lost in translation. This was something else, something direct, something I hadn't been prepared for. For him, it was simple. He wanted me. For me, it was anything but simple. I must have read that letter a dozen times, the words blurring and sharpening with every glance. I love you. 3 small words, yet they carried the weight of an empire in my chest. I hadn't come here for this. I had come for numbers, contracts, signatures, the kind of ink that secured futures. Love, or whatever this was, had no place and plan. But as I sat in that silent room, the desert night pressing in through the window, I couldn't stop thinking about what this meant. If I rejected him, everything could collapse. My company, the deal, the months of work, all gone. The Sheikh wasn't just another client I could replace. He was the deal. Without him, my dreams could dry up faster than the sands outside. Yet if I accepted, what then? I didn't know what I'd be walking into. A game? A prison? A romance that burned too hot and left me with nothing but ashes? The risk wasn't just professional. It was personal, maybe even dangerous. My chest tightened with the thought. I wasn't naive. I had read enough to know that love between 2 men wasn't easy here. The culture, the expectations, the eyes always watching. If I said yes, was I agreeing to more than I understood? And yet, there was a pull I couldn't deny. Something in his eyes during dinner. Something in the way he listened. The way he leaned forward as though my words mattered more than the wealth that surrounded him. It was intoxicating, and it terrified me. I lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling, and for a moment my mind slipped backward. Past relationships, brief, careless things, flashed through my thoughts. A college fling that ended when she found someone more stable. A boy I'd kissed at a party once, only pretend the next day it hadn't happened. Nothing had ever felt serious. Nothing had ever made my heart stumble the way a single glance from the Sheikh did. And this was after only a few days. What did that mean? Was it real, or was it the strangeness of the situation, the intensity of being so far from home, caught in a place where everything seemed larger, brighter, heavier? I tried to reason with myself, but the questions only grew louder. Fear told me to run, to pack my bags, to secure what papers I could and flee before the trap closed around me. Curiosity whispered otherwise. What if his words were true? What if the feeling I thought I saw in his eyes was an illusion, but something deeper? What if, against all odds, this was the start of something I didn't even know I was searching for? My fingers brushed the letter again, tracing the ink as if the curves might reveal an answer. My heart thudded like a drum in my chest. I didn't know whether to laugh at the absurdity or cry at the weight of it all. And then 3 knocks. I froze. They weren't loud, just firm, steady, carrying through the stillness of night. For a moment, I told myself it could be a servant, perhaps bringing water, perhaps a mistake. But deep down, I already knew. My throat tightened. Slowly, I rose from bed, the letter still in my hand. Each step toward the door felt heavier, as though the ground itself resisted me. When I reached the handle, I hesitated, my palm hovering, my mind screaming with questions. What if I opened it and found him there, with those eyes that unraveled me? What if I let him in and lost control of everything I had built so carefully? What if saying yes tonight meant never being able to say no again? But the silence between the knocks was unbearable. My curiosity, my fear, my desire, they tangled into one impossible knot. I turned the handle, and there he was. The Sheikh stood in the doorway, his robe soft in the lantern light, his face shadowed but his eyes unguarded. For the first time since I had met him, he didn't look powerful. He looked human, vulnerable, almost desperate. "May I come in?" he asked softly. I stepped aside without a word, my heartbeat echoing in my ears as he crossed the threshold. The door shut behind him, and the room suddenly felt smaller, charged, alive with something I could no longer deny. The moment he stepped inside, the air in the room changed. It wasn't just his presence. It was the way he carried himself, not with the unshakable confidence of a ruler, but with a weight I hadn't seen before. His hands weren't clasped behind his back in formality. They trembled slightly at his sides. His eyes, those same dark eyes that had unsettled me during our meetings, seemed uncertain now, searching for something. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. I watched him pace once, twice, then stop near the small table by the window. The desert night filtered into the curtains, spilling pale light across his features. He looked stripped bare, not the Sheikh, not the man of power, but a man who carried loneliness like a second skin. Finally, he broke the silence. "You must forgive me," he said, his voice low, almost unsteady. "I know this is not how business is done, not how men like me should act." I swallowed, unsure whether to speak. The letter still lay on the bed behind me, its words burning in my mind. He followed my silence with a shaky breath. "You look at me and you see wealth, power, control," he continued. "That is what the world sees. But inside I am alone, surrounded by people yet untouched, respected yet unseen. Every day I play the role expected of me. Every night I return to emptiness." His words hung in the air, heavier than the silence before. For the first time, I believed him. His vulnerability wasn't an act. It was raw, cutting. "And then you walked in," he said, his eyes locking on mine. "Young, fearless, caring more than your years should allow. And I saw something I didn't know I was missing. I agreed to your terms not because they were fair, but because I wanted you close. I wanted a reason for you to stay." The admission stunned me. My breath caught, my body tensed, my mind screamed at me to remember why I'd come here. Yet beneath that noise was something else, a quiet thrum, a pull I couldn't deny. He took a hesitant step closer. His hand lifted, but he paused as if afraid. I didn't move. Slowly, he leaned forward, his lips brushing mine with the gentleness of someone touching fire for the first time. It wasn't forceful, it wasn't a conquest. It was tender, hesitant, filled with the weight of everything unsaid. Shock jolted through me. My instinct was to pull back, but my body didn't obey. Instead, I froze, my heart hammering, and then, to my own surprise, I let it happen. The warmth of his mouth lingered, not demanding but asking if I could feel even a fraction of what he felt. When he pulled away, his face was etched with fear. Not fear of me, but fear of rejection, of exposure, of what the truth meant. "I shouldn't," he whispered, "but I can't help myself." I pressed a hand to my lips, still tingling, my thoughts racing. I should have been angry. I should have reminded him that this was business, that I hadn't come here for this. But I wasn't angry. I was shaken, yes, but somewhere inside I felt something stir. Something I hadn't felt in years. Something real. "Why me?" I finally asked, my voice rough. "Because you are not like the others," he said without hesitation. "You don't bow to me. You don't flatter me. You look me in the eye as if I am a man, not a throne. You are alive, and near you, for the first time in many years. So am I." The words sank deep, disarming me more than the kiss had. I sat down on the edge of the bed, my head in my hands, while he remained standing, watching me with a kind of desperate patience. "I came here for oil," I said quietly, almost to myself. "And you will have it," he promised instantly. "The deal is yours. But I ask only, don't leave me with this emptiness again." I looked up at him, torn, my chest tight. He wasn't lying. Every word, every tremor in his voice was real. "Do you understand what you're asking?" I said, "This isn't a game. It's not safe. For either of us." He nodded, moving closer until he was standing in front of me. "I know the risks better than anyone. But I also know that denying myself is worse. I've lived in shadows long enough." I shook my head, half in disbelief, half in surrender. "You barely know me." He crouched slightly, so our eyes met. His hand brushed against mine, warm and trembling. "I know enough. Enough to feel something I cannot ignore." There was silence between us then, filled only by the thud of my heartbeat and the hum of the desert wind outside. And then he said it, his lips trembling with the words. "You're too yummy. Please help me. I am in trouble." The phrase startled me, a strange mix of vulnerable and playful, but his eyes betrayed the truth. It wasn't a joke. "What trouble?" I asked carefully, my voice steadier than I felt. He exhaled slowly, the weight of centuries in his breath. "My people, My reputation. Everything I am supposed to be. They would never accept this. If they knew it would ruin me, it could ruin you. But hiding who I am, it is killing me slowly. His confession struck me harder than any kiss. I saw the fear in his eyes, the fear of being unmasked, the fear of living and die without ever being seen for who he truly was. And I realized then that this wasn't just about desire. It was about survival. His and maybe even mine. I agreed to stay. At first, I told myself it was only for a couple of days, just long enough to keep the Sheikh happy and secure the deal for my company. But deep down, I already sensed it was more than that. Something in his eyes, in the way he had confessed his loneliness the night before, had reached a part of me I didn't even know was empty. The next morning, I woke up to find a servant knocking softly at my door, carrying a tray with fresh dates, warm bread, and spiced tea. Along with it was a handwritten note. I would be honored if you joined me for breakfast in the courtyard. His handwriting was neat, deliberate, almost regal. When I stepped out into the palace courtyard, the sight took my breath away. The air was cool, the sky painted in soft shades of gold, and the fountains in the garden whispered gently. He was already seated there, not in his grand ceremonial robes, but in a simple white thobe, his expression warmer, less guarded than before. "Good morning," he greeted, and for the first time, it felt less like a sheik addressing a guest and more like a man speaking to someone he wanted close. Over breakfast, our conversation wandered. He asked about my childhood in America, what my parents were like, how I first got the crazy idea of running an oil business at 25. I laughed, admitting that most people told me I was insane. He didn't laugh at me. Instead, he listened with a seriousness that made me feel seen. "You remind me of myself when I was younger," he said quietly, full of fire, wanted to build something bigger than anyone thought possible. After breakfast, he offered to take me outside the city, into the desert. I agreed, curious, and soon we were driving across endless golden dunes in one of his jeeps. The desert stretched as far as the eye could see, a vast ocean of sand, empty and alive all at once. "This is where I come when I need to breathe," he said, his hand steady on the wheel. "Out here, there are no courtiers, no expectations, just silence." When we stopped, we climbed to the top of a dune and sat side by side. The wind played with the sand around us, the horizon shimmering with heat. He closed his eyes for a moment, breathing deeply. "You know," he said, almost as if confessing to the desert itself, "sometimes I wish I weren't born into this role. People think power is freedom, but it is a cage, gilded, beautiful, but still a cage." I didn't know what to say at first, but then I remembered the nights I lay awake back home, wondering if I'd ever escape the shadow of doubt, the endless worry that I wasn't enough for the empire I was trying to build. "I get it," I said softly. "Mine isn't the same cage, but I felt trapped too. Everyone doubting me, expecting me to fail. Sometimes it feels like I'm carrying the weight of proving the world wrong." He turned his head to me then, and the look in his eyes was one I would never forget. Recognition, understanding, as if he saw himself reflected in me. That afternoon, back at the palace, he invited me to a private dinner. Unlike the grand halls filled with gold and crystal, this was a small room lit only by lanterns. The food was simple: grilled lamb, rice, spiced vegetables, but the intimacy made it unforgettable. We sat across from each other, yet the space between us felt like it was shrinking with every smile, every story shared. He told me about his childhood, about how he was trained from a young age to be a leader, never allowed to falter, never allowed to be just a boy. I shared stories of my early struggles, sleeping on a friend's couch when I first started my business, eating cheap noodles while negotiating deals with millionaires. "You're braver than you know," he said suddenly. His voice was soft, but it carried a weight. I felt my chest tighten. No one had ever said that to me before. Later that evening, when we walked to the palace gardens under the moonlight, the air between us shifted. He reached out, hesitant, as if asking for permission, and brushed his fingers against mine. I didn't pull away. In that quiet moment, surrounded by jasmine and starlight, I realized that this wasn't just hospitality, wasn't just an arrangement for oil or business security. Something real was forming between us, something that scared me, yet pulled me in deeper with every heartbeat. The days that followed blurred into a rhythm I hadn't expected. Breakfast together in the courtyard, long talks in hidden corners of the palace, walks in the desert where the horizon seemed to belong only to us. Sometimes he would show me things he never showed anyone. His private library filled with poetry, his small workshop where he crafted things with his hands just to remind himself he could create something outside politics. And sometimes it was silence that spoke the loudest. Sitting side by side, not needing words, only the steady presence of each other. The attraction between us grew, yes, but it wasn't rushed or shallow. It wasn't about desire alone. It was about discovery. Every time he smiled at me, every time he trusted me with a story or a fear, I felt something inside me shift. I wasn't just negotiating an oil deal anymore. I was standing at the edge of something much larger, something that had the power to change not just my business, but my heart. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and crimson over the desert, he turned to me, his expression softer than I'd ever seen. "I thought I was bringing you here for business," he said quietly. "But now, I don't want to imagine these days without you." His words hit me with a force I hadn't prepared for, because deep down, I realized I didn't want to imagine them without him either. It wasn't just a deal anymore. It was personal. The warmth of those days with him was intoxicating, but soon I began to notice the glances. At first, they were subtle. Servants bowing a little lower when I passed, guards exchanging looks when the Sheikh and I walked side by side to the gardens. But slowly, it became impossible to ignore. Rumors were spreading. One afternoon, as I entered the dining hall, I heard two attendants whispering in Arabic, their words hushed but urgent. They fell silent the moment they noticed me. I didn't need to know the language to feel the weight of suspicion in the air. The Sheikh noticed too. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. That night, over dinner, I couldn't keep it in any longer. "They're talking," I whispered, leaning closer across the table. "Your staff, they suspect something. If this gets out—" He interrupted, his voice calm but edged with steel. "They will not dare. But yes, they sense what they should not." "And what if it doesn't stop at whispers?" I asked, my chest tightening. "You're not just any man. If the wrong people hear, this could destroy you. It could destroy both of us." For the first time since I'd met him, I saw fear flash in his eyes. Not fear for himself, but for me. "You must trust me," he said quietly. "I will not let harm come to you. Not while you are under my roof." I wanted to believe him, but the risks were real. Late that evening, as I walked alone through the courtyard, the thought gnawed at me. Maybe I should leave while I still could. My company had what it needed. The deal was secure. Why stay and invite danger? But then I remembered the way he looked at me, the way his words had unlocked something in me I hadn't felt before. Was I really ready to walk away from that? The question haunted me until one night, the danger became almost tangible. We were in his private library, sitting close, his hand resting over mine as we whispered about the future. The room smelled of old parchment and sandalwood, the silence thick around us. Then, suddenly, footsteps echoed down the corridor. The Sheikh froze. He squeezed my hand and pulled me toward the shadow corner just as the door creaked open. One of his advisors stepped in, holding a stack of documents, his eyes scanning the room. My heart thundered in my chest. I was certain he would see us. The Sheikh held his breath, his body rigid against mine, and for a moment the world stopped. But after a pause, the advisor muttered something to himself, placed the papers on the desk, and left. The door closed. The silence that followed was deafening. I exhaled shakily, realizing my hands were trembling. That was too close. I whispered. The Sheikh turned to me, his expression unreadable, then softened as he cupped my face gently. "Yes, too close. But I will not let them take this from me." His words both reassured and terrified me, because now I knew we were walking on the edge of a blade. One wrong step, and everything could come crashing down. I went to bed that night torn between fear and longing. My mind screamed at me to run, to protect myself, to leave before it was too late. But my heart clung to him, to the man who had shown me his truth beneath the weight of crowns and tradition. And so I stayed, knowing the risks, knowing the danger, because some bonds are worth defying the world for. The morning after our narrow escape, I found him waiting for me in the garden. The sun had just risen, casting a soft golden glow over the palace walls, but his face was more solemn than I had ever seen. He gestured for me to sit beside him on the stone bench, with the vines curled lazily around the carved pillars. For a long moment, he said nothing. The silence pressed heavily between us, broken only by the song of distant birds. Finally, he turned to me, his eyes deep and steady. "You must decide," he said quietly. "I cannot keep you here against your will. If you want to go, you will leave safely with your deal intact. You will have everything you came for." My chest tightened. I knew what he was offering. Freedom, security, the end of this dangerous dance. I could return to America with my company saved, my ambitions fulfilled. On paper, I would have everything I had wanted, but he wasn't finished. His voice trembled just slightly when he added, "Or you may stay, not as a prisoner, not as a pawn, but as yourself with me. I cannot promise it will be easy. I cannot promise it will be safe. But I can promise I will not hide what I feel." My heart ached to the honesty in his words. He wasn't a sheik commanding obedience. He was simply a man. Offer me a choice. I looked away, staring at the desert horizon stretching endlessly beyond the palace walls. My mind ran in circles, career versus love, safety versus risk. I thought of my family back home, their expectations, the weight of everything I had fought to build. Could I risk it all for something as fragile as this? But then I thought of the nights we had spent walking under the stars, the way his laughter warmed me, the rare moments when he let down the walls that everyone else only saw. With him, I wasn't just a businessman fighting to survive. I was human. I was seen. "I don't want to run away from this," I finally whispered, almost surprised at myself at the words. He turned to me, eyes wide with quiet hope. "You mean?" "I mean I'll stay. Not forever, maybe not recklessly, but for now. Long enough to know if what I feel is real. Long enough to know if this is more than just chance." The relief that washed over his face nearly broke me. He exhaled as though he had been holding his breath for days, and then gently he reached for my hand. His fingers were warm, trembling slightly against mine. "You do not know what this means to me," he murmured, emotion thick in his voice. "I swear to you, I will not take your trust lightly." We sat in silence after that, hands entwined, the sun climbing higher above us. I knew the risks hadn't disappeared. They lingered in the shadows, waiting for us to falter. But in that moment, the decision felt right. I wasn't ready to leave. I wasn't ready to pretend none of this had happened. For better or worse, I wanted to see where this path could lead. And so, against all reason, I stayed. The days that followed were lived in careful balance. Meetings in daylight, smiles and handshakes with the world, and quiet moments stolen in the shadows of the palace at night. We both knew the risks, so we made a plan. Keep our bond private, yet let be the fire that guided us forward. No one else needed to know. What mattered was that we did. The oil deal was finalized without complication. The contract sealed with ink and trust. My company was safe, my future secure. But when I looked at him across the grand table, his eyes meeting mine for just a fleeting second, I realized the deal was only a fraction of what I was taking with me. When it was time to leave, he walked me to the gates himself, his hand brushing mine as if to memorize its warmth. "This is not goodbye," he whispered, "only until we meet again." As the plane lifted off above the golden sands, I felt it in my bones. I hadn't just won a business victory. I carried something far richer. I came here for oil, but I left with something greater. The heart of a man who taught me love is worth the risk.